Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. In today's Letter Together Friday, we are going to practice a quote together. So first things first, if you are new to Letter Together Friday, on Fridays I create a tutorial or kind of a lettering lesson video where you can follow along with me and we're going to learn something specific. So for today's video, I have a free printable for you. You can find that in the resource library on my website. I will link it below in the description box, but I'll also put it in the comments because I don't know if it's just me, but I'm having a hard time clicking into the description box these days of videos sometimes. And if neither of those work, you can find it on my website at howtohandletter.com/resource library. For today's quote of the month, we are going to do a quote that I say quite often and have over the past several years. Practice makes progress. And one of you guys actually asked me if I had a worksheet that said this, and I was like, I don't know how I don't already. So that's why I decided to make this one. So thank you for the suggestion, and I hope that this is helpful for you. We have a smaller size and we have a larger size. So for the smaller size, I'm going to be using a small brush pen. And for the larger size, I am going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm going to be using some metallic watercolors. So this is the brush pen that I have today. It is a zebra brush pen, and it might be a tiny bit small for this, but I think it's going to work okay. And then for the watercolors, I have this, they used to be called Finetec. Let me see, this is what it looks like now. And this is the rainbow palette, and I actually really like these for hand lettering using a dip pen or a pointed pen. And you just kind of mix the water with the watercolor, and you kind of want it to be a consistency of like cream or milk, something like that. And then I just paint it onto my dip pen with a paintbrush, and it's so beautiful. Actually, I have one right here. This is from the other palette. I was just experimenting on this envelope, but you can see how beautiful that is. And this is actually from this palette. It's this color right here. So super beautiful for using a dip pen. It almost looks, I wish you could see it on camera. It almost looks embossed on this paper. But anyway, for today, I'm going to be using this Pentel Aquash water brush. And this is the little bit larger size, and so I'm not sure which color I'm going to use. Maybe I'll use a combination of all of them. But yeah, let's get right into practicing this month's quote of the month. And I apologize if it's loud in the background or if you can hear my dog snoring. It's super windy. My dog is a loud sleeper, all the things, but hopefully that's okay. So if you are not familiar with this pen, this zebra pen, it is a smaller tip. It kind of may remind you of the Pentel Touch, which I will show you in comparison. It does look really similar, but if I'm comparing it to something, I would say that to me it feels a little bit more like the Tombow Fude pens with the hard tip. The Pentel Touch is a little bit softer in my opinion, and this one has that kind of scratchy feel where it's a more firm nib. So if you prefer the softness of the Pentel Touch over the Tombow Fude, then you might not prefer these. For me, I have both the hard tip of the Tombow Fude pens, and then I have a few of these. And if I'm being honest, I probably could just choose one or the other. To me, they're so similar that I really don't need both. So I do really like this pen, but again, if you have the Tombow Fude and the hard tip, you may not need it. It's totally a personal preference. But yeah, it would feel really similar to me, that they kind of do the same thing. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that topic, but they're all great pens if you are looking for something with a smaller brush tip that's a little bit maybe easier to control as a beginner. I really love these smaller size brush tips. So let's move on to the Practice Makes Progress with the larger size brush pen. In my case, I'm going to be using the Pentel Aquash water brush and these paints. Now I do have a cup of water over here. It is a little bit off color because I've been using it with gold, but I am going to activate these 2 colors, the pink and the kind of rose color. And I think I'm going to switch back and forth between the 2 of them while I letter. Now I typically don't do watercolor on this type of a paper. I would like to use watercolor paper, but for practice, I do not mind at all. It's not going to dry as beautifully as it would dry on a piece of watercolor paper, but when it comes to practicing, I'm okay with that. The other thing is I do print out my worksheets on HP Premium 32 paper, so my paper here is a little bit thicker than your average copy paper. So if you were just using a really thin, inexpensive copy paper, you may find that yours doesn't hold water quite as well as this HP Premium 32, so that could be an issue if you're using something really thin, but for me, I don't mind practicing on this. Now, I have actually run watercolor paper through my printer and it does work. I did have to cut it down to size, but that would be another option too if you wanted to practice but you really did want to use watercolor paper. And when it comes to the end, the progress, we have a double S. I know double S's are not fun. I really don't like them at all. A lot of people, I've been doing hand lettering on YouTube for several years and I know so many people do not like a lowercase k. I do not mind hand lettering lowercase k, but oh my goodness, I do not like the double S's. I think though this way is one of the more simple ways to create a double S by leaving that bottom a little bit open, so you're not having to do this like deep slope down and then back up to get to your next, the top of your next S. I think this is a little bit more simple of a way. So if you've ever struggled with double S's, maybe try leaving it open a little bit. I think adding that little curve at the top helps it to look a little bit nicer as well. So those are just a couple of options for you to try. And again, this printable is free on my website. So if you want to print this out and practice it for yourself, hopefully that will give you a little bit of help when creating double S's in the future. Now, one thing you will see a little bit when I'm doing hand lettering with watercolor and a water brush, that's a little bit different than a brush pen, is that I can kind of go back and forth with my strokes. So with a brush pen, I'm pretty consistent with going down with my thick down strokes and then going back up with my thin up strokes and going around those curves in the order that you would write typically. But when it comes to watercolor, it's a little bit more forgiving in my opinion, where when you are going around like a difficult curve like that P, it's okay to pick up that water brush and kind of go backwards with it if you need to, or kind of drag your watercolor, you know, maybe in the opposite direction. If I did have watercolor paper here, I'd probably get some beautiful watercolor bleeds with the pink going into the rose and back and forth. And I'm not getting that as much because I'm not using a paper that holds a lot of water. But if I were to be using watercolor paper, you may want to drag that color back and forth into each other and let those kind of blend together. And so I personally, for that reason, think that watercolor is super forgiving when it comes to beginners. I know that it can seem like it's this really difficult thing, and sometimes the end result just looks so professional. Like you might see watercolor pieces online where you're like, oh my goodness, that must have taken a long time, and sometimes that's true. But I do think that in general, when it comes to brush lettering and hand lettering, thick and thin strokes and watercolor, I just think watercolor can be a little bit forgiving. If you don't get your stroke thick enough, you can go back and thicken it up a little bit. Or if you're struggling, like I said, with some of those curves, you can go backwards around a curve and then you're not trying to, you know, make these really difficult loops with a brush. And so if you've never tried watercolor lettering, I would maybe suggest it if you like the look of it and if that's something that interests you. I think it can be really beautiful and it doesn't have to be as difficult as it sometimes can look. I do have some specific watercolor tutorials on this channel. I'll link them at the end of this video if you are looking for more tips on how to begin hand lettering with watercolors. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. So I hope you enjoy. I cannot believe it took me this long to make a quote of the month worksheet with this quote on it, because if there's one thing that I've been saying on this channel over the last 5 or so years, it probably is practice makes progress. I truly believe that hand lettering just gets better with practice, and as you begin to develop that muscle memory and things just get a little bit easier for you, I just think that's really where the progress happens, and that is why I make these videos, to hopefully help you progress in your hand lettering journey. So let me know if you have any comments below. If you are new to Letter Together Friday, make sure to check out the Letter Together Friday playlist where you can start from the beginning and watch all the videos all the way through. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next week. Bye!